Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Professor Ming's Strategic Insights. A couple of weeks ago, actually on the 9th of December, the news agency, the official news agency, so-called New China News Agency, announced that according to their sources, the Politburo, the central authority organ of the Chinese Communist Party, had a meeting, and they have come to the conclusion, beginning in the year of 2025, namely next year, they would adopt a more active or even more aggressive financial policy and an adequate easing monetary policy in an attempt to boost both consumption and domestic demand. The decisions were later echoed by another meeting, so-called Central Economic Work Meeting, also held in Beijing from 11th to the 12th. Of course, in the second meeting, there are other policy options were mentioned, suggested, or even adopted, but these two are the most important ones. So the news made some people very happy. They think or they claim that China's economy is safe and all will be saved. Because, again, according to the official news sources, it was 16 years ago when the government of Communist China adopted a similar policy. Was 16 years ago. It was in late 2008, when an international financial crisis erupted globally. So they adopted a similar policy and then boosted the economy and brought the economy back to the right track, and it was good. So it was very effective. So people were very happy about it, and so is this time. I hate to dampen people's enthusiasm about this new policy. I want to warn against this kind of over-optimism. I think a more prudent assessment is in order. This policy, no matter what you call it, in essence is what we call quantitative easing of monetary policy, in short, QE. For the past 4 decades, 40-some years, China's development or China's economic development basically rely on a what we call Troika, or a three in hand. Namely, there are 3 horses. The first horse is what they call investment, or basically official investment. Second one is export, and the third one is consumption. Let's talk about the investment first. In the past, because it's a socialist system or a communist system, so basically everything or every resources or all the resources are controlled in the government's hands, and governments from the central government to the local governments, so all levels of governments. So they have a lot of money to spend, especially after the economy had been going good, and they entered into the WTO and things like that. So they got more and more money to spend. So they spend a lot of money in what we call the public construction, or sometimes we call it infrastructure building or whatever. So they build roads and highways, or high-speed rail, airports, dams, or reservoir, or whatever. Well, in a sense, building infrastructure would boost the economy, that's for sure. At least it'll boost GDP, both the government overall GDP, or local, or the GDP of local governments provisionally. But when it exceeds a certain limit, it will be counterproductive. You can see the growth of the GDP figure, but it's maybe so productive as to the actual economic development. We'll explain that later on. But anyway, that's investment. So as we see it, the public investment in China is basically reached its limit, at least at this time. So they noticed that too. So they've been very cautious about this kind of so-called public investment, although they still do it, but not in a scale as large as in the past. So that's to say the first horse investment, or official investment, doesn't run as well as it did. So let's turn to the second horse, export. They heavily relied on export in the past. It takes about 30-some% of their revenue income. But in recent years, as we all know, that they have experienced a very, very bad, a very serious shrinkage of export because of trade war, tariffs war, or even COVID-19. So that's the second horse. Since the two horses do not run as well as in the past, they have to turn their attention to the third horse, that is to say, domestic consumption. According to the official statistics, we noticed that the domestic consumption rate, in comparison with other countries, that mainland China's consumption rate, domestic consumption rate, is pretty low. It's about 30-some% or even lower at times. Whereas in other countries, it could run as high as 50 or 60-some%, like in European countries, or in America, Canada, or Japan, those advanced countries. So the Communist Chinese government considered that this is the hope, the best hope. So they turned their attention to domestic consumption. They tried that before, actually. When President Trump, in his first term, he initiated the tariff war or the trade war, and it did not kill the other two horses, but it slowed down the other two horses. So China tried that the third horse. They called it domestic circulation. In Chinese, it's called 内循环. The slogan had been coming out for, 6-7 years perhaps, but it didn't work. It didn't work out very well. So this time they had no other way to turn to, so they have to turn back to this one again. But the only difference is they changed the slogan and then they put it back out again. So the question is, why did not it work in the first term? Or why did not it work in the first time? So why was the stimulation of domestic consumption successful? There are short-term factors and long-term factors. Let's talk about the short-term ones first. The first one is, of course, the trade war, which drives the foreign companies and also the Taiwanese companies to leave mainland China. The second one is the one we talked about, the truncation of the one country, two systems in Hong Kong. Again, it drives the foreign companies, capitals, and talent to escape from Hong Kong. Third one is the very strict or very stiff quarantine policy adopted to fight so-called COVID-19, which renders the many small and medium businesses owned by the local people, we call it the POB, privately owned businesses in mainland China, go bankrupt or close down. And also it caused a very stagnant economy, and then it also exhausts family savings. So that's the consequences of this very strict quarantine policy adopted during the COVID time. The fourth one is the one we've been talked about before. Again, is the advancement or promotion of the state-owned enterprises, short as SOE, against the privately owned businesses. They call it 国进民退. So again, it caused the bankruptcy or closing up of the POB, probably privately owned businesses. So you have no idea. You may not know that how much contribution these POBs, privately owned businesses, contribute to China's economy. According to Xi Jinping himself, he attended a seminar in, November the 1st, 2018, about 6 years ago. He vividly mentioned that POBs in China have made major contribution to country's economy. This is what he said. He said these companies or these POBs have contributed more than 50% of the revenues collected by the government. And it contributed more than 60% of the total GDP. And it contributed more than 70% of technical or technological innovation. It contributed more than 80% of city and township employment. This employment thing in China is very tricky. I'll try to explain that later on, not today. It's kind of complicated. Anyway, it's an inadequate statistics, but that's the only thing that we can have officially. The last one is, he said, the POBs have contributed more than 90% of the number of the enterprises and companies or businesses. So 5, 6, 7, and 9. So you can know that how much contribution that the POBs have made to the country's economy. So the proper or the adequate policy for China to develop its economy is to foster or to promote more POBs, but they go the other way around. So as we suggested before. So these are the short-term factors, or the group of short-term factors. Let's turn to the long-term factors. The first one is they don't have enough what we call the core technology or core production. Well, if you check the statistics of China's exports to European countries and to American countries, both Canada and United States mainly, there are two parts. First one is what we call the people's livelihood produces or products, such as food, clothing, or simple family appliances, and things like that. The second part, about another 50%, is the high-tech production or high-tech goods. But these are basically manufactured by foreign enterprises and even Taiwanese enterprises who station in mainland. And the first part, what we call the daily usage part, were produced or manufactured by local enterprises, namely Chinese enterprises. But let me remind you, both parts, either way, they need to import a good number of either parts or services or semi-parts from three major sources. You might have guessed it: Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. Without these supplies, they are only halfway. So that means they rely heavily to make the proper exports. Otherwise, it's impossible. That's the first long-term factor. The second one is shortage of innovation. Yes, I know they have patents in many, many areas, and also they got a good number of things. But the question is, the invention or the innovation are basically done in labs or in some research institutions, but they're unable to transform them into either commercial use or into a more profit-making usage. So that's the problem. And the main reason, or the very, very fundamental reason for this kind of inability is that the system, the basic system or the fundamental system they adopted, that's what we call the communist system. Because it's a command economy, it does not provide enough incentive or motivation for people to do that, unless you can relax your restriction or you can relax your control by politics over economy and over other areas in the society. Okay, having explained the reasons for unsuccessful stimulation of domestic consumption, let's now turn back to this so-called QE policy. Actually, they've been doing it already. They didn't say it. They just want to say it now because it's unavoidable. It's about time. And because it did not work, although it's been put forward for some time, but it did not, or it hasn't been working as well as they expected. So what can they do now? They can only say it to stimulate confidence and then pour in more money to stimulate more confidence. So like I said, stimulation of the so-called confidence in consumption or in whatever or investment is necessary. So the question again, why isn't there enough confidence about China's economy? There's another short-term factor contributing to this lack of confidence. It's because of the bad deterioration of the so-called business environment. Why is that? Because they just revised and then expanded the so-called national security law, anti-espionage law, short as anti-spy law, and the so-called the data security law or information security law. and then code for keeping state secret of Article 23 of the Basic Law of Hong Kong. All these add up to this shortage of confidence or lack of confidence. So it is this lack of confidence leads us to believe that this time when they put out this new QE policy, it'll be effective, but the effects will be very, very limited. Why is that? Well, there are several reasons for that. For the enterprises, whether that's state-owned enterprises or POBs, whatever they are, basically their policy or their reaction to this QE policy is that they'll borrow new money, borrow new debt to repay for the old debts. So that's borrow the new and to pay the old, and that's for the enterprises or for the businesses. As for the individuals and the private families, if they can get a loan or get something from the bank, probably they'll save it. They'll put it in their deposit because they worry about tomorrow. They're not sure whether they can still keep the job, or even if they keep the job, whether they get paid, or they'll probably suffer a pay cut or something else, something unexpected. They don't know, so they have to prepare for some unthinkable. So they'll put it in their deposit, put it in their saving, the second part. As for the local governments, these are the target as we assess now. These are the primary organs that get a big chunk of this new so-called the QE money. That's them. So what they would do again is to borrow the new money and to pay for the old debt. So a good chunk of money will go to that. So that's why the money poured into the market will not actually go into production as expected by the central government. So that's why we said it'll be effective, but with very limited effect. But more importantly, as we suggested before, about 5 or 6 months ago, remember the third plenum of the 20th Party Congress held in mid-July. Our comments about their policy adopted at the plenum was that first, it was not a real reform. A real reform is more opening up and more relaxation, especially to relax or to relieve the political control over economy. But they did the opposite. Second one, instead of making a structural change or making a structural innovation, they simply put on patches on it. So again, that's not a right way to do it. All these things, all this kind of measures run against the general rule or general laws of economic development, especially in a highly competitive international situation. That's not the right way to do it. So as we suggested 6 months ago, with China's economy will probably go spiral downward. Well, if you look at the figures from July to now, you'll notice that's a trend. The trend coincides with our prediction. So the last thing I can remind you is that either individual or family or companies, especially the companies owned by Taiwanese businessmen, make the best preparation for the worst situation. Well, Trump will be in office in the White House in another month. And the new policy or the new tariff policy toward China would be rather stiff. So there's something that we have to make the best preparation for. And well, we'll talk about other things in other time. I hope you like today's program. So if you like our program, please subscribe and relate it to your friends and help us out. Anyway, I'll see you next time.